Why hello there, and welcome back to Let's Make Us a Character. And an episode that I honestly didn't really plan on making. I was just going to cover Bunnies and Burrows for the 50th episode, cover a 50-year-old game thing, and then just move on because I'm honestly not really all that interested in it. But then I decided that since there are only 2 discrete editions of Bunnies and Burrows, I might as well cover them both. Despite the incredibly low expectations and generally negative experiences I have had with any legacy edition of a game that hasn't been supported for a decade or more. Like, if you watch this series, you will know that games tend to not come back stronger after a hiatus like that. It's either a barely or not at all changed attempt to make a quick buck off the nostalgia market, or a new edition in name only changed so radically that it loses any distinctive qualities of the original game. But for now, I guess, let's just focus on Bunnies and Burrows fantasy role-playing game, aka Bunnies and Burrows 3rd edition, which was released in 2019, 43 years after the original, 37 years after the not really 2nd edition, and 27 years after the GURPS edition, which I have no intention of covering because I already covered GURPS and I don't really want to cover GURPS again. And was published by Frog God Games after a Kickstarter funding campaign, which I really wish I could say was not a red flag, but I guess that's just the ttrpg landscape we have to deal with now. As well as being written by the original authors, which I also wish I could say was a good sign, but being written by the original author was really the biggest issue with Tunnels and Trolls 7th edition and Deluxe. However, it is also very notable for being considerably larger than the previous editions, weighing in at 224 pages versus the 80 pages of the original, or 36 of the 2nd edition, which, yes, had the same text, but in a smaller size and 2 columns. Layout can do a lot. So, this edition is newer and a lot bigger, but is it better? I guess the only way to find out is to Let's Make Us a Bunnies and Burrows fantasy role-playing game character. So just like in the original, characters have 8 base traits: strength, speed, intelligence, agility instead of dexterity, constitution, mysticism instead of wisdom, smell, and charisma, with each trait having 1 associated profession: fighter for strength, runner for speed, scout for intelligence, maverick for agility, empath for constitution, seer for mysticism, herbalist for smell, and storyteller for charisma. So, thematically, the same options as in the previous edition. But now, each trait also has a 2nd associated profession, which can only be taken by other animals. Yes, in one of the biggest updates to the game, you can now play as animals other than rabbits. So, in addition to the base bunny professions, we now have Raccoon Bandit, Jackrabbit Herald, Chipmunk Spy, Skunk Burglar, Porcupine Guardian, Possum Shaman, Armadillo Trader, and Squirrel Grifter. So, much in the style of basic Dungeons & Dragons, you can choose to be one of the 8 rabbit professions, or one of the other species who do not get a separate profession option. They each get a listed profession, but it's basically just species as class. Also, I do feel the need to point out that the exclusion of rats here as a playable species is a clear and intentional act of anti-rat bias. Like, rats would fit in great as a spy or grifter archetype, but I guess they figured it would just be easier to stick to the lazy stereotype of rat bad. And for reasons that will be immediately clear, whether we are going to play as a rabbit or one of the other species is the first choice that we must make. And as this is Bunnies and Burrows, a game designed around playing as rabbits, it would make the most sense to select Rabbit. But also, what's the point of having all these nice new options if we're not going to use any of them? So I think I'm gonna go with Armadillo, as they are the silliest option with the most little guy energy. And also, apparently can be paid in woims. So, species Armadillo and profession Trader, because that is the only option for an armadillo. Then for each trait, a rabbit rolls 3d6, with every other species rolling 4d6 for their primary trait and 2d6 for 2 others. So as an armadillo, we roll 4d6 for smell, 2d6 for strength and intelligence, and 3d6 for everything else. Which is, of course, why we had to choose species first, a thing that I have mixed feelings on. Like, I am a vocal proponent of race, species, ancestry, what have you, as a mechanically meaningful part of a character. But also, when paired with random rolling like we have here, I really don't like having to make that decision first. Like, in this scenario, if I had chosen Rabbit, we would get to roll traits and then select a profession for which those traits are advantageous. But for any other option, while the odds are skewed with that extra die, it is still possible to roll poorly and then be locked into a profession that you just do not have traits that are suited for. But I said Armadillo, and I am sticking with Armadillo, so 4 strength, 12 speed, 7 intelligence, 8 agility, 13 constitution, 12 mysticism, 20 smell, and 9 charisma. We then have the option of adding either 2 to 1 trait or 1 to 3 traits, which I do really like, giving you that extra point for choosing to spread the points around rather than dumping them all in one place. So let's go with 1 to 3, putting 1 point in speed, mysticism, and, I don't know, strength. That one's not really going to matter anyway. And just like in earlier editions, each trait also has a level, all of which start at 0. But this time, each trait also has a maximum level based on the rolled value. So we have a maximum strength level of 4, intelligence, agility, and charisma of 5, speed, constitution, and mysticism of 6, and smell of 8. And we actually get 2 free advancement points during character creation, something that the earlier editions really could have used. One of which must be put in your primary trait, and the other one wherever you want or saved for later. So smell up to level 1, and let's level up speed 2. Then, in addition to your trait value and trait level, you now also have a trait base bonus, also based on your trait value. So +1 for 13 in speed, constitution, and mysticism, +3 for 20 in smell, and +0 for everything else. And just because I like the maths, you do have around a 26% chance of rolling a 13 or higher on 3d6. So you are statistically likely to not have a bonus in most of your traits. And finally, each trait has a rating, which is equal to the trait base bonus plus level. So we have +1 in constitution and mysticism, +2 in speed, +4 in smell, and +0 in everything else. And I should probably mention at this point that your actual trait values do not change, and honestly, do not factor into the rules at all after this point, which can make spending those bonus points less of an interesting tactical decision and more of a what is the obvious place to assign them. Like, speed and mysticism were the only traits that could be bumped up to the next tier of bonuses, so there was an objectively correct way to assign those points. 1 to speed, 1 to mysticism, and then the third one didn't matter. But now that all of our traits are settled, I suppose that just like last time, I will go through and explain what each one does, as well as the abilities of the rabbit professions, even though we're not making a rabbit, just for comparison's sake because I covered them in the previous video. But I will not be covering all the other species, other than armadillo of course, just because that's a lot of additional content that I do not need to cover or really want to. So let's begin, starting with strength, which determines a rabbit's jumping ability. I'm just going to say rabbit even though we are making an armadillo because that is how the book is written, allowing them to jump a horizontal distance equal to strength rating +1 rabbit body lengths. Yeah, that's a new one for the obscure unit of measurement board, which is specified to be about 30 centimeters or 1 foot, and then a vertical jump equal to 1/2 that. So we can jump 1 rabbit body length horizontally and 1/2 rabbit body length vertically. Presumably, it doesn't actually say that there are different jump measurements for non-rabbits. Strength also grants a damage bonus equal to strength rating, which is 0, and affects ability to carry creatures or objects, with a rabbit being able to carry another with a constitution rating equal to or less than their strength rating. And for objects can carry about a 0.5 kilogram per point of strength rating, or nudge 3 times that, which I assume means push. Unfortunately though, 0 times 3 is still 0. Then fighters specifically have the ability to vault over minor obstacles while running during pursuits, which is a thing that I will explain later, and rip after a successful bite. Then at strength level 3 may vault over major obstacles and make a second attack in combat in place of a movement. And at strength level 6 may attempt a killing blow. So that's it for strength. Now on to speed, which determines movement, with rabbits being able to rove 2 hexes in 10 minutes, +1 per point of speed base bonus. So with 13 speed, 3 hexes per 10 minutes, with 1 roving hex being 50 to 100 meters, which is a bit of a range for a game that uses measured grid-based exploration with specific distances. Rabbits also get a number of movement points equal to their speed rating +2, which are used in combat, so 2 + 1 bonus + 1 level is 4. Speed rating is also added to defense score, which of course is a thing I will explain later and is +2. Rabbits can climb a number of meters per turn equal to their speed rating, so 2 meters per turn, and may swim 1d6 plus speed rating meters per turn, and once again, +2. Then runners may use 2 tactics at once during a pursuit, take an additional move action at any time during combat at the cost of 1 hit point, at speed level 3, dodge and attack in the same turn, and at level 6, intercept an attack, basically running in and pushing an ally out of the way and taking the attack yourself. So on to intelligence, which is used for spotting predators, traps, hazards, and pests, using intelligence base bonus for most, and intelligence rating for active predator and pest searches, as well as freeing other rabbits from traps, but bonus or rating is +0 for us. With scouts being able to flash their tail to confound predators, use their rating in place of base bonus when passively detecting predators, traps, and pests, as well as auto-succeeding on active attempts to detect pests, as well as adding their intelligence base bonus on checks to interpret scent marks. They can also evaluate opponents in combat, learning their strength, speed, agility, and current hit points. At speed level 3, can passively detect sneakier predators, and at level 6, attempt to decipher the function of man-things, which is what human items are called in this game. Then agility, which is added to your attack score in combat, so +0, and rabbits can also carry 1 apple-sized object in their mouth, as well as 1 small item in their fur, plus a number of additional items equal to their agility base bonus, which is of course 0, so 1 overall. It is also no longer stated that rabbits can make little woven bags, only that they may find containers that can then be used to carry items. Agility also affects your ability to throw for accuracy, while strength is used for punting for distance. But once again, 0 for both of those. And is also used in disarming traps, constructions, and camouflage and disguises, but those are all basically just make an agility check, which is of course +0. And then Mavericks may tumble to change direction in pursuits, carry a number of small objects up to their agility rating rather than bonus, at agility level 3 may steal items in combat and carry large items with one foreleg, and at level 6 may grasp man things, basically meaning that they can hold and hypothetically operate a human item designed to be operated with one hand, assuming that someone else is there to tell them how the thing works, like a scout. Then Constitution, which determines hit points, with rabbits getting 8+ Constitution base bonus hit points, and another 5+ Constitution base bonus hit points per level. But that's rabbits, and we are not making a rabbit, we are making an armadillo. And armadillos start with 10+ Constitution base bonus hit points and get 6+ Constitution base bonus hit points per level. So with Constitution 13 level 0, 11 hit points, and you have no idea how difficult it is to repeatedly say Constitution base bonus hit points. Rabbits also heal hit points equal to their Constitution rating when sleeping for 4 hours, which can be done twice per day. Which does seem like something of a poor design decision, because that means that with a Constitution below 13, which remember, is likely, and no levels, you just do not heal naturally. Unless you eat your poop, which I won't go into detail on, but does allow you to recover extra HP while healing up to your con base bonus +1 per day. So, I don't know how that works with being able to heal twice per day, but I guess it does, and also presumably does not apply to armadillos, so we can heal a grand total of 2 hit points per day. Which honestly is not that unusual for an old school game. Constitution rating is also used for resisting disease and poison, and Constitution base bonus used in determining number of offspring, because of course it is, and if you survive the winter. Yeah, this version has not lessened the you are fragile rabbits with short lifespans aspect of the game, but has actually made it a little more interesting. Then empaths can give themselves or allies an extra 2 hex movement at the cost of 1 hit point, and of course have their empathic healing ability, which now heals 1d6 damage, but damages the empath for 2 points out of combat or 3 during. Also, that damage no longer heals within minutes like it did in the previous edition, but their natural healing amount is doubled. At Constitution level 3, empaths can also perform empathic hurting, dealing damage equal to their Constitution base bonus and healing 1 hit point. And at level 6, can attempt to bring another rabbit back from the dead. Which I guess is a pretty good segue into mysticism, which is used in resisting shock, which now lasts for 10 minutes out of combat and 1d6 rounds during, so no longer completely takes you out of an encounter. Sensing danger, which is kind of an interesting mechanic because it is stated that in a potentially dangerous situation, the GM should select one rabbit at random and make a secret roll for them. So they do get the opportunity to foresee upcoming danger, but without the unfortunate side effect of everyone rolling and then proceeding with caution no matter what the result was. I have opinions on perception checks. And detecting falsehoods, with all 3 of those using mysticism rating, which thanks to that bonus point is +1. And also riddles, I guess. There aren't like any mechanics or anything, it just kind of says that rabbits with high mysticism are good at riddles. Then seers can feign disease to make themselves seem less desirable to predators, trance, which is the viewing the future from previous versions, but now restricted to the seer, probably because it never made sense to be a thing that every rabbit could do, and is basically the same except that the questions posed and answers received are limited to a number of words equal to the seer's mysticism rating, which is then converted to a cryptic vision in kind of a weird way. But then it does get interesting. At Mysticism level 3, a seer gains the Luck ability, which allows them to reroll or grant rerolls a number of times per day equal to their Mysticism rating. The interesting part being that this is flavored as the seer having had a vision of upcoming events and given the target advice to potentially change the outcome, which is a very simple way to handle something like that, but unfortunately, for some reason, a lot of game designers and even players seem weirdly resistant to the idea of abilities that change things that have happened. Like, not in a mystical time travel way, just in an, oh yeah, here's a thing that happened that just wasn't mentioned until now way. As if they're trying to protect some kind of integrity of a world that is literally just being made up on the fly by people sitting around a table. Anyway, enough of my crazy fiction isn't real manifesto. At level 6, seers can also tempt fate once per day, allowing them to attempt to directly change something that happened in the past, once again because giving players the limited ability to say, actually, it happened this way instead, doesn't ruin any divine integrity of a made-up world. And I do have a bit of a nitpicky complaint here, and that is the change from wisdom to mysticism, which I guess makes sense with the seer abilities, but at the cost of making less sense for the general abilities. Like, using mysticism to resist shock and detect falsehoods doesn't really make sense. Honestly, I have a similar feeling about the change from dexterity to agility, too. It really seems like all of the agility-related tasks focus primarily on manual dexterity, and it's just weird because those are the only two that were changed, and both seem to have been changed to something that makes less sense. But enough of my weird nitpicks, and on to smell, which as a traitor/armadillo is our primary trait, and is basically just used for identifying food, herbs, scat and spore, decoding scent markings, and tracking, all using smell rating, which as our primary trait is actually fairly decent at +4. With Herbalist being able to dispense offensive herbs and apply beneficial ones in combat, at level 3 perform Advanced Herb Preparation, simple preparations can be done by any rabbit, and at level 6, attempt to alter the effects of herbs. And I'm not going to cover herbalism this time because, honestly, I just don't want to. Then, as an Armadillo Traitor, we reduce all damage by 3, or 5 if rolled into a ball, have the ability to automatically detect nearby hidden objects or creatures, are an Exceptional Digger, meaning that we can accomplish a tunnel dig or extension in a single round without a strength check. At Constitution level 3, can walk along the bottom of a body of water instead of swimming and hold our breath for a number of minutes equal to our Constitution rating, or just float across the top. At Smell level 3, deal double damage with claw attacks, and at Smell level 6, become immune to disease and pests, but also cannot climb trees or bite in combat. And this is another point where I have a bit of an issue, because none of those abilities were related to being a traitor, only an armadillo. And while some of the non-rabbit options do have a combination of species and profession abilities, others, like armadillo, just don't. And also tying things like double damage on claw attacks and immunity to disease and pests to your smell level doesn't really make any kind of sense, other than that this particular profession is tied to the smell trait. And it really makes me question why they even bothered giving the other species specified professions. Like, how is the armadillo trader in any way distinctive from an armadillo diplomat, guide, or contractor? Honestly, that last one makes more sense because they get a bonus to digging. Anyway, one trait left, which is charisma, which determines number of languages known, with rabbits knowing their own rabbit language, +1 per point of charisma rating, so +0. Also, the system of general and specific languages from the previous edition has been replaced with just the general ones, which, yeah, the other system was cool, but probably more trouble than it was worth. Also, rabbits are specified to not be able to learn the language of bats, worms, or humans, which is odd because they can learn the language of insects and spiders, which presumably includes fleas and ticks. But we are not a rabbit, we are an armadillo, and as a non-rabbit, we speak our native language, Grubber, and get the rabbit language for free, which is kinda surprising because I guess I've just reached a point where I am not expecting games to take into account things like all characters should have a shared language even if they don't have the stats to learn additional languages, just because that makes the game function. Charisma is also used for attempting to communicate without a shared language, and then they also just kind of tacked on a bunch of other stuff in the charisma section that I guess they didn't know where else to put. And finally, storytellers may encourage other rabbits, only rabbits it is specified, within 2 hexes during a pursuit, allowing them to move 2 hexes, but not gaining that benefit themselves, can learn 2 languages instead of 1 per point of charisma rating, at charisma level 3 can confuse enemies, making them lose their next attack, and at level 6 enthrall a target, which, like in previous editions, makes them temporarily act as a loyal follower. And that is it for the traits, and this character is done. So as you can see, compared to the classic editions, it is significantly more streamlined, but also presented in a way that still feels familiar to that original version. Like, at no point did I find myself asking, is this Bunnies and Burrows? It definitely is, just an updated version of that original game. And as you may have gathered from me not explaining some kind of ad hoc mechanics for each individual task that came up, the most notable update here is that this edition actually has core mechanics. So now most things run through a system of skill checks involving rolling a d6 and adding a trait rating, or sometimes bonus, with success on a result exceeding a difficulty value, or in a few instances equaling or exceeding. I don't know, I guess it just wouldn't be Bunnies and Burrows if the rules were 100% consistent. So let's say that, just because of the kind of game that this is, we need to identify some scat, aka poop. And also, let's say that the GM has decided that this is a moderate task with a difficulty value of 6. So we roll the die, add our smell rating of 4, and 8 exceeds 6, so we have identified that this is duck poop, and about 3 hours old. And you might be thinking that sounds fairly simple and straightforward, and then also be wondering why this book is so large if the mechanics are so simple. Because what I've covered so far only accounts for like a 1/9 of the book's total page count, with most of the remaining 200 pages being filled with weird miscellaneous subsystems and mechanics, some of which I will now explain. So as you may recall, because I just mentioned it a little while ago, each profession has an ability that can be used during pursuits, and I said I would explain what that was later, and now it's later. So pursuits seem to be a fairly major part of the game, despite apparently being optional extended rules, and also happen to be a particularly good example of the new form that Bunnies and Burrows took after its decades-long slumber. So, let's say that our armadillo trader was out conducting some trading with a local rabbit runner, when the two were spotted by a tree octopus. Yeah, sorry, if you're going to give me stats for a tree octopus, I am going to use tree octopus. It's your fault at that point. And in the interest of time, let's just skip the spotting and approach and get right into the pursuit. But before we can actually do that, we must set up the pursuit board, which is an abstract representation of the distance between pursuer and fugitives. Yeah, this is going to be a whole thing. So first, we must place the pursuer token on the pursuer starting position, indicated with a red fox. If we were being pursued by hostile rabbits or pack hunters, additional pursuers could be stacked in the same hex or placed in the ones marked with a red rabbit icon. And if we were dealing with a stealth predator, the pursuer token would be placed face down on one of those 3 hexes with dummy tokens placed in the other 2. But I don't really want to deal with all of that, so 1 pursuer face up in the normal pursuer starting hex. Next, we must place obstacle tokens, which is done by, and I must remind you that I am completely serious here, referencing the type of terrain, and if memory serves me correct, tree octopuses are found in the pine forests of the Pacific Northwest, and a pine forest has 8 major and 12 minor obstacles. So the Game Master takes 8 major obstacle tokens and 12 blank obstacle tokens, turns them all face down, mixes them up, and then has the players assign them to the 20 obstacle hexes, which are indicated with a shrubbery. Then, we must identify the target as predators do not attack a whole group of prey. They single out one individual to pursue and attack. Yeah, sure, let's just say that's true. Which for predators of intelligence 3 or less is determined randomly. For intelligence 4 is the target with the lowest constitution, and intelligence 5 or higher, the GM may select a target based on any criterion. Which, I'll be honest here, seems like an excuse to show off knowing the word criterion, because any criteria makes more sense logically and grammatically. Unless, you are expected to declare a single criterion upon which that decision has been made. And I guess based on the criterion of squishiness, the tree octopus is going to target the rabbit. Then we determine the initial pursuit distance, or IPD, which is the lower of the specified maximum initial pursuit distance for the terrain type, or the listed initial pursuit distance of the predator. So a pine forest has a maximum IPD of 9, and a tree octopus 4, so the initial pursuit distance is 4. And now that we know the initial pursuit distance, we can place the fugitive tokens. So first, we must place the target in a hex a number of hexes away from the pursuer, equal to the initial pursuit distance. And also within 2 hexes of the midline of the map. The target's token is placed 4 hexes away from the pursuer, facing away from the pursuer's starting position. And then we stack any additional fugitive tokens in the same hex. Then we flip over all of the obstacle tokens and remove the blank ones as they are unnecessary, as the minor obstacles are still indicated with a shrubbery. So now we have finally set up the pursuit board, and with the pursuit board set up, we can finally get to actually playing. So pursuits occur in rounds, with the fugitives having the goal of escaping by reaching one of the green hexes on the other side of the board, and the pursuer having the goal of initiating combat by entering the target's hex. With rabbits, and presumably armadillos, having a basic movement allowance equal to 2 plus their speed base bonus, so the same as roving movement, and a number of tactical maneuver uses equal to their speed rating. So with speed 13 level 1, we have a basic movement allowance of 3 and 2 tactical uses. And let's just say that our client has a speed of 16 level 2, so a base bonus of +2 and a rating of 4 for a basic movement allowance of 4 and 4 tactical uses. However, you also only know a number of tactics equal to the higher of your speed or mysticism rating. Why didn't I mention that during character creation? I don't know, why didn't they? So let's just say that we know Speed Burst and Twist, and that the runner knows Speed Burst, Zigzag, Jink, and Twist. But for Predators, things work a little differently, having a listed movement allowance, in this case 6, and a number of tactical uses equal to their intelligence rating. And you might be seeing Intelligence 5 and thinking, oh, well that's a rating of 0, but you would be wrong, because for NPAs, I guess, the listed values are their ratings, not values, so 5. And Predators know a number of tactics based on their type and category. Unfortunately, the Beasts of Folklore and Legend doesn't really have a category here, but as previously mentioned, you cannot give me a tree octopus and then expect me to not use a tree octopus. So I am just going to treat a tree octopus as a chaser, even though really it would make more sense to treat them as a stalker, but as previously mentioned, I just don't want to deal with the stealth rules. And a sub-adult, meaning that they know switch, hurry, and spin. Which means that we are just about ready to actually play this pursuit, but first... No, I'm kidding this time. Yeah, we can actually start now. So round 1, and the target always moves first, and let's say that the runner is using the Speed Burst tactic, granting them 1 extra hex of movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 hexes towards the exit. Then the other fugitives get to move, and we definitely cannot outrun this octopus, but maybe we can outmaneuver it, as the movement here is perhaps most notable for its difficulty in changing directions, as I will now demonstrate. So we move 1, 2, then pivot, which allows us to turn 1 hex face, and 3. And pivoting can only be done before your last hex of movement, and other than tactics like twist or taking the rotate action, is the only way you can change direction, making turning, as I said, very difficult. However, there is one exception to that. The Speed Burst tactic lets you add 1 hex specifically at the beginning or end of your movement, meaning that you can use it after a pivot. So let's do that since we are currently in a direct line from the octopus, which is a bad place to be, and 1 more hex. Then the octopus goes and uses the hurry tactic, which also gives an extra hex of movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And let's be honest here, at this point we were saved less by clever tactics and movement than we were by just not being the target. Because with that much movement, the octopus still could have gotten us. So now round 2, and the rabbit moves 1, 2, 3, then runs into a major obstacle. And entering a hex with a major obstacle consumes all remaining movement, which was 1 anyway, so 4. Then we just continue on our way, that other situation being none of our business. Then the octopus moves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pivots, and 6. Which means it is now occupying the same hex as the target, which usually would mean that the pursuit was over. However, Speed Burst can also be used as a reaction at the end of the pursuer's movement, although doing so requires making a speed versus intelligence check against the pursuer, which is successful, letting the runner speed burst 1 additional hex. Then round 3, and the octopus is still a little too close for comfort, so the runner is going to use their combo ability to use 2 tactics at once, using speed burst to add 1 hex to the beginning of their movement, and zigzag, which reduces the pursuer's movement allowance to 2 for their next turn. Then run away, 1, 2, 3, 4, pivot 5, and then we move, 1, 2, pivot 3, and the octopus, now thoroughly zagged, can only move 2 hexes, so opts to pivot and move 1 hex. And keep in mind that even with their full movement allowance, they still would have only been able to move 1 hex after that pivot. That's why I started the fugitives 1 hex off a straight line like that. It's actually a moderate advantage since shifting into an adjacent lane actually requires spending almost an entire turn for the second pivot. So on to round 4, and the runner runs 1, 2, 3, 4, and has safely escaped. Then we continue slowly but surely towards the other safe zone, and the octopus, having lost their target, must find a new one. And hey, there's one! So 1, 2, 3, pivot, and 4. And round 5, where we, now as the target, get to move first. Not that there's any other fugitives to move after us, but if there were other fugitives, they would move after us. So we move 1, 2, and 3 into a minor obstacle. And we could use a speed burst to get ourselves a little closer to that safe zone, but it might be better to save that in case of an emergency. An emergency like an octopus coming in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pivot, and 6, and blocking our path. So round 6, and we can either try to run past the octopus or turn around and go for the other safe zone, which seems like the smart choice. So let's use our last tactic to twist, allowing us to turn 1 hex face, then pivot and 1 hex, and that's our entire turn. However, if we were a rabbit, we would then be able to make an additional pivot and 1 hex move, but we are not, so we had to use that tactic. Then the octopus, 1 hex, pivot, 1 hex. Then round 7, and we 1, 2, pivot 3 towards the lower safe zone, and the octopus pivots and 1. As I keep saying, turning is a very slow and difficult process in this part of the game. So round 8, and we have a mostly clear path to freedom, so 1, 2, 3, but the octopus is right behind us, 1, 2, 3, 4, pivot 5, and round 9, 1 and 2, which takes us into a minor obstacle, meaning we must roll a d6, losing any remaining movement on a result equal to or less than our movement allowance. Which we do, giving the octopus the chance to close in 1, 2, 3, and 4 into the same hex. And since we do not have any remaining tactical uses, we can't even try to escape. And just for reference, with movement 6, that means the octopus auto-fails on that check, as do most predators. So if we had succeeded and gotten that 1 extra hex of movement, the octopus would have gotten caught in the obstacle, and we would have had just enough movement to make it to safety on our next turn. But we did not, so now we must move into combat, which is, of course, a whole other thing. Like, this whole situation was just to determine if combat would occur, and between whom. And to engage in combat, we must first get out the battle board corresponding with the terrain we are currently in, as well as the combat tactics cards for all involved parties. Well, I'm not actually sure if NPCs need them, but I'm just going to use one for the sake of example. Then, once again, we must place all involved parties according to some little routine. So, first, the specified target, us, is placed on a randomly rolled one of the numbered hexes, and 2, then the aggressor can be placed on any of the other numbered hexes. Then, if there were other characters involved in the combat, each side would then alternate placing characters on the other numbered hexes, which of course brings me to the very weird point that any given combat is restricted to 6 characters. Or more specifically, each side of a combat is restricted to 3 characters. And the only characters who can actually be involved in a combat, or at least one resulting from a pursuit, are those in the same hex when the combat was initiated, with those within 2 hexes when combat begins being able to enter the combat in the second round from one of the arrow hexes, and anyone further away just being completely excluded. So splitting up, like I did here, is a good tactic if you are confident that you can get away and don't care about what happens to your allies if they do get caught. Whereas sticking together makes it easier to get caught, but also gives you an advantage in combat if it comes to that. And fortunately, we do not have to randomly place obstacles, because all obstacles and other features are just static parts of the battle board. So, with that relatively minimal setup, we can actually just get into combat, which is carried out in order of initiative, which is equal to speed rating. That's it, just speed rating, with the aggressor getting a +1 bonus in the first round. So we have 2, and the octopus has 6, so goes first and will continue to do so for the entire combat. Then all involved parties select their combat tactics for the round, indicating such on their combat tactics card. Also, it is specifically stated that any discussion of tactics between players is considered to be in character, meaning that your opponents can potentially hear what you're saying, which could be an interesting anti-metagaming safeguard in a better game. So let's just say that the octopus is going to bite, and we are going to dodge. So the octopus goes first, and each turn characters get a movement and an attack, which can be executed in either order. And as I mentioned a very long time ago, characters get a number of movement points equal to their speed rating +2, as opposed to movement allowance, which was speed base bonus +2. So we have 4 and the octopus 7. And you might foolishly be assuming that movement in combat works the same as movement in pursuits, but as suggested by my use of the word foolishly, it of course does not. Like, they are similar, but just like using any 2 Adobe products, it is still very much a situation where you have to learn to do the same thing 2 different ways. The biggest difference being that during pursuit movement, you can only change direction during a move, and in combat, only at the beginning or end of a move. And instead of being able to either move through an obstacle or not, it just costs extra movement points. So the octopus spends 1 point to change facing, which can be used to change to any direction, 2 points to enter a hex containing an obstacle, in this case a tree trunk, 2 more to move into an unobstructed adjacent hex, and at the end of movement you can rotate 1 face for free, or up to 3 for 1 point. And the octopus has the point, so turns to face our armadillo. And now I need to talk about attack areas. As you might expect, facing is just as important to combat as it is to movement. So Bite, the attack that the octopus intends to perform here, targets the 1 hex directly in front of the attacker. But other attacks can target different areas. For example, a claw attack can target an opponent in any of the 3 hexes in front of you, and a kick any of the 3 behind. So the octopus is in position and ready to attack, and now it's going to get weird again. The first time someone attacks or is attacked in a round, they roll 2d6 and assign 1 to attack and the other to defense, adding agility and speed rating respectively to determine attack and defense scores, with an attack being successful if the attacker's attack score is greater than or equal to the target's defense score. So both sides roll, and the octopus has attack 8 and defense 7, and we have attack 1 and defense 9 because dodge gives you +2 to your defense score for the round. And 8 is not greater than or equal to 9, so we avoid a beaky incident. Then, if the attacker were able to make another attack, the attack die would be reduced by 2, but it can't, so it is just removed from the card. Also, if there were a possibility of taking another attack, the defense die would be kept and reduced by 1, but once again, not possible, so just removed. So basically, you roll a single attack and defense for the entire round, which is then reduced by 2 or 1 respectively after each attack or defense. But now it is our turn, so we turn for 1 point, then 2 hexes, and I am going to assume crossing that red line would require an extra movement point, which we do not have, so I guess just turn to an open side and end turn. So clear off the cards, and round 2. And the octopus is still in a bitey mood, but I think we should try to stand our ground this time and claw. So the octopus easily closes the gap, turns, and attacks. Dice are rolled and assigned, and this time we are unavoidably octopused. And on a hit, you must decide if you are going to use the preset for the attack or one of the 2 options. So a bite attack does core damage, which is 1d6 plus strength rating, and you can also attempt to hold or inflict a critical hit at the cost of making yourself vulnerable. And the octopus is going to attempt to hold because its unbreakable hold ability basically means that would be the end of the encounter. So core damage of 1d6 plus agility rating is 9, which is then reduced by 3 from our armor. Maybe. The traits section says that it's just a base ability, but here in the combat section it is listed as a level 3 and up ability. But traders also get double damage on claw attacks as their listed level 3 ability, which is not here in the combat rules, so I'm just going to assume that the more prominently featured answer is the correct one, so 6 damage total. Then the octopus rolls to hold, succeeding on a 5 or 6, and misses, and then takes the vulnerable marker until the start of its next turn, suffering a -1 penalty to defense value, or granting a +1 bonus to attacks against them, or a +2 bonus because, as I said, part of the Bunnies and Burrows charm is inconsistently written rules. But 2 out of 3 say 1, so I'm just going with that. So now it is our turn, and while we are not directly facing the octopus, it is in one of those 3 forward hexes that can be targeted with a claw attack. And with that bonus, or penalty, our claw attack hits, and we also have the opportunity to simply deal damage or risk for a better outcome. And let's just go for a critical hit. So 1d6 plus 0 damage is 2, and then we have to roll for the crit, which requires a 6. And hey, how convenient, almost as if the rolls are predetermined for the purpose of explanation. Then roll on the critical hit table 1, adding strength rating of +0 for 6, which is a temporary injury to the foreleg, which reduces the octopus's agility rating by 1. And then we also take a vulnerability marker. Then move 1 hex and rotate to a defensible position just in case this gamble doesn't pay off. So on to round 3, the choices once again being bite and dodge, and then as it is the start of the octopus's turn, the vulnerability marker is removed. Then the dice are rolled, and I believe this is the point where I would declare intent to use the flee option from the dodge attack, which gives a +3 bonus to defense that lasts until the end of the encounter, but at the cost of not being able to perform any other action other than attempting to GTFO. And with that bonus and the octopus's injury, the attack barely misses. So our turn, vulnerability marker gone, then 1 point to turn towards the exit, and 3 more to skedaddle. And we have escaped to curl up into a ball another day. An ability that, while I did not actually use, I do feel the need to point out is specified that you will begin rolling downhill if you use it on a slope, which is adorable. So that's it for combat, more or less. And compared to the previous editions, a lot has been simplified, and a lot has been complicated. And personally, I think both for the worse. Like, the actual mechanics of calculating a hit have been greatly simplified, but then buried inside this whole thing. And yes, the original system of cross-referencing attack types and scores to get 2 hit numbers was complicated, but in a way that added actual depth and tactics to the mechanics of combat, without demanding that much time and effort to use. Whereas the system here is also complicated, but in a way that just adds 2 slightly different tactical movement systems in which you can occasionally make an attack. The complexity doesn't really add anything other than a passing resemblance to D&D, and demands a significant investment of time and effort to use. Like, I am not a fan of tactical combat in general, as it usually feels like stopping your role-playing game to play a board game, and that is especially true here, having to use 2 different pre-generated boards with predetermined starting location, obstacle layouts, escape conditions, and even arbitrary limits on how many characters can be involved in a combat. Like, I cannot imagine anyone getting excited about the GM saying, "Alright guys, time to pull out the pursuit board." And then, as I said, the book is just loaded with these little systems that, while not as bad as this, do seem like they wouldn't really do much other than just make players groan whenever they had to be interacted with. However, while I'm not going to cover all of that stuff because it would take a very long time and be very annoying for both of us, there is one more thing I do want to cover, because, let's be honest here, how could I pass up the chance to discuss the breeding rules? So, remember how I said that they made the likeliness of dying a little more interesting? Well, first, if your character dies during their first year of life, they can simply be replaced by an identical twin, which, you may have noticed from the combat example, is not exactly unlikely for a new character, as those trait levels are incredibly important for, not dying. Making this a convenient fix for those early character oopsie I'm dead moments. But after that, if your character dies or retires because debilitating injuries are just as likely as death, you can either roll up a new one or choose from your offspring. And of course, these are rules for rabbits, but I'm just going to assume that they also apply to armadillos. So let's say Wormy Joe has found himself a nice lady dillo, and they decide to engage in some non-advertiser friendly activities. First, we need to determine the size of the litter, which is 1d6 plus the doe's constitution bonus. So only the uterus haver stats affect litter size. Then we must determine the genetics of each rabbit, which is done by rolling a d6 for each trait and taking one parent's trait on an even result and the others on an odd result, with sex being determined the same way. Then, if you need a new character, you can simply choose one of your offspring to play as. A system that I have some very specific opinions on. On one hand, the idea of playing as multiple short-lived characters of the same lineage through a longer-running campaign is a very interesting idea, and in the abstract, so is the idea of improving future characters based on the best of their parents' traits. However, in practice, the focus on finding ideal mates that will pass on superior genetics to your offspring feels a little eugenicsy. And it's one of those things that, yes, makes sense within the context of the game's world. But when you anthropomorphize animals, you are imposing human social norms on those animals, whether you like it or even intend to or realize you are doing it or not. And yes, if intentional, presenting a society that violates those norms can be interesting and is a common tactic used in anthromedia. But here it just doesn't feel intentional. Rather that their only intention was being as neutral as possible in their presentation of this world, out of a misguided belief that the media they were copying did the same. And that was Bunnies and Burrows fantasy role-playing game, aka 3rd edition. Or at least as much of it as I am willing to cover. A game that, in a weird way, I kinda want to compare to Fatal. Not in the surface level rape and cannibalism way, but in the much deeper game that doesn't know what it wants to be, so tries to be several conflicting things at once way. Also, they are the only 2 games I can name off the top of my head that have breeding rules. Like, all the focus on rabbit biology, mating, nutrition, digestion, etc. comes across very simulationist. But then, at every turn, you run into some little subsystem or minigame that you have to deal with to move forward with that experience. And in general, that's fine. Like, games should be willing to compromise on realism for the sake of, being a game. But this game just keeps hitting you with these very board gamey elements that really seem like they would just get in the way more than anything else. Like, why didn't I cover the herbalism rules this time? Well, because they are 12 pages long this time, including one of the game's many mini-games. And from the pretense of objectivity, the game is well done for what it is. But even more so than the previous editions, what it is just incredibly niche. Now you have to want that very survival of the fittest rabbit playing experience, but also this glut of additional mechanical systems. I understand why someone would want to play this game, but that person is not me. And I also suspect that despite some very good updates, the primary appeal of this is supposed to be the name and legacy of the original. And thank you for watching. If you enjoy my sassy wit, art, and saucy euphemisms, you can follow me on Blue Sky and Tumblr, or catch me streaming on Twitch occasionally, just, not very often. Also, there is a Discord now because people kept asking me if there was a Discord, and now there is. Links to all of that in the description. And as always, an extra special thanks to my Fightin' Flail Snails. Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Diablade, Frankly Fabulous Festering Flesh, Just Dave, Nikolai Snowtail, Puggo, Randy Mulholland, Ramogus, Renee D, Stephen Hafner, Stephen Kramer, Tila Glar, Toshiro Kuro, and Tyro the Fox. If you want to be cool like them, check out my Patreon or channel memberships. 2 different things that provide similar but distinct benefits because they are on different platforms that only offer different benefits. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, smash the buttons, whatever they are. Or, maybe click on one of these other videos that has mysteriously manifested from the ethers, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.